As the size and effectiveness of the CIDG continued to grow, the Joint Chiefs began to doubt that the CIA had the personnel and resources to manage all the Special Forces troops now in the country. As the Special Forces operations continued to win hearts and minds, Washington made a fatal decision. They switched tactical command of Green Beret operations from the CIA to MAC-V. Once MAC-V had command of the CIDG program, the mission began to change. For both the SF troops and the local strike force, the change was for the worse. MAC-V understood neither the nature of special operations nor the requirements of counterinsurgency. From the beginning, MAC-V viewed the Berets' involvement in the CIDG program as too static.
Well, in '64 actually is when it begins. There's a decision to use Special Forces as a long-range reconnaissance function, and it takes two basic forms. The first form is the Greek teams, if you will, the Sigma and Omega teams, which are rather large, fairly large groups of 25 Special Forces with hatchet teams to back them up, which were indigenous SIGIs. It could be as large as 100. And what they would do is they would go into enemy base areas inside South Vietnam, usually on reconnaissance missions, but they were big enough that they could handle any trouble. And if they needed, they could call on air support artillery or these hatchet teams to back them up. And they did that a lot, particularly in the southern Central Highlands and in the Three Corps region, well west of Saigon, over on the Cambodian border. And then also in '64, there is the formation of the Studies and Observations Group, which is SOG, which becomes quite famous. It's a covert arm, cross-border arm of SOG. Most basically, there are other services involved in it, but it's mostly Special Forces. And what SOG is a realization that, a political realization that the prohibition against American operations in Laos and Cambodia and North Vietnam is counterproductive. You just can't fight a war that way. Normally, you would have sent reconnaissance elements, big reconnaissance elements, in an overt way into the base areas in Laos, and then you would have invaded them if you found the army. But that's off limits, so SOG has to do that. So it's a covert operation. Special Forces with very large limitations on them are allowed in certain areas of Laos to start out with, and Cambodia later on. Laos beginning in '65. Cambodia beginning in '66, to search out the base areas, get intelligence, and call in airstrikes.
As a result, the Green Berets were removed from the role of administering the CIDG program and reassigned to providing surveillance along the Cambodian and Laotian borders. Now, the Shadow Warriors would conduct offensive missions against the belly of the beast, Viet Cong support bases.
Well, we were playing in their backyard. Basically, the VC, Viet Cong, who were South Vietnamese fighting against the Vietnamese, we were basically going into their territory and saying, we can play this game too.
By 1965, U.S. ground forces were pouring into Vietnam, and the newly established 5th Special Forces Group was actively taking action against Viet Cong infiltration routes. The standing order was to find, fix, and destroy the enemy forces where they live. The team was flown in by unmarked Hueys that would touch down on a number of clearings before the A-team would jump out and head for cover on the run. Bob Wessel was the door gunner.
We were flying a Special Forces group into Cambodia. This was a CIA presidential decision. It was made. We were going over in unmarked helicopters and unmarked uniforms.
There was good reason for the unmarked Huey. At the time, the U.S. government was still claiming that they would not violate the neutrality of Cambodia.
Of course, we weren't in Cambodia at the time. And that particular day, that morning, we flew out and dropped off 3 Americans and 8 Cambodian mercenaries. And their mission was they were along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They were supposed to watch the NVA movement coming down the trail, unmarked trails, and their basic mission was to capture an enemy truck and bring it back.
No sooner did Wessel and his crew fly out of sight when all hell broke loose for the strike force. As the berets and their cadre fought for their lives, the air crews picked up their radio messages.
It was about lunchtime. We was eating our lunch, and we was monitoring them on the radio on the helicopter, and they caught hell. They got surrounded. There was a helicopter before us. It was supposed to be first extraction helicopter. Well, he was monitoring the same thing, and his battery went dead, so he couldn't fire his up. So we were second helicopter for extraction. It was Chief Warrant Officer Bill Armstrong. Co-pilot was James Fusel. And there was Gary Land as the other door gunner, and myself. We had a James Calvary, Special Forces medic on a helicopter. So we were one to go and extract them. I can remember flying towards the area, and about treetop level, I was looking down, and I could see, it looked like there was columns of NVA moving in that area. I mean, we could see them moving in, which is, there's some butt kickers. The NVA, they're regular Army, they're good. But I remember going in, and it was an area where it was a lot of trees. We had to hover and drop straight down into the area.
The Special Forces team was now in a running firefight, desperately trying to make it to the nearest landing zone and the safety of extraction.
So we had landed, and we had moved away from the LZ and basically set up a perimeter, and just wanted to see if we were being followed. We saw another team across the valley being infiltrated. We could see them. They were about 5 miles away, and we sat there and we watched the gunships come in. We saw the choppers try to go in and get them out, and we also listened to it on the radio. And that was a very difficult time for us.
The choppers were burning up the turbos, trying to get there in time.
As we dropped down in the area, we just started catching fire going in. Matter of fact, they shut all our radio equipment out. It was gone. So we had no communication with the CNC ship up above. So we were basically on our own. And I can remember landing, and there was this fire going on. I could hear Gary firing on the other side, and I was firing.
As the Green Berets and the surviving Cambodians reached the LZ and the choppers, the NVA turned their fury on the rescuing slicks and the air crews.
We had a lot of incoming rounds, and I remember sitting there firing. I had a bunch of them coming toward me, like 15, 20 of them I fired, and they all went down. And they never came back up. About that time, I thought I heard Gary quit firing, or I heard him yell on the other side, and I turned my head to look. And when I turned my head, I got hit 3 times in the chest and once through the neck. And probably by him yelling or something on our side, probably saying he probably shot me right through the throat. But I didn't pass out, lucky enough, because what happened was I had so much blood on my glasses I couldn't see it. So of course, I had to take the time to clean my glasses off and get my back together again.
As Wessel cleaned his glasses, the battered team piled into the waiting choppers. The undamaged Hueys lifted off. Wessel and his crew members were the only living Americans still on the ground. It was at that moment that something strange occurred. The fire on the left and right sides facing the deadly M16 machine guns of Wessel and Land slackened.
About the time I got done cleaning, they figured out, I guess, they couldn't come through the sides, so they started coming up behind the helicopter. And of course, the R-60s were mounted, and you couldn't turn them that far. So I grabbed the M16 and started to get out and spray the area. About that time, I could feel the helicopter starting to move. But at the same time, I seen Mr. Armstrong's heads go down. And kind of scary, I didn't know what happened to him.
As the Huey Slick tried to stay airborne, Wessel looked around at the interior of the damaged ship.
Gary Land, I could see him laying on the floor, part of him laying on the floor. And the Special Forces guy in the helicopter, he had been shot. He had got shot through the elbow and came out his shoulder. And I found out later on Gary Land had been shot through the leg, and some of his toes had been shot off. And the only reason he quit firing was they'd shot his ammo off to 60. And I remember we were starting to fly out of there, and Mr. Calvary, the medic, asked if I wanted a shot of morphine, which I wasn't in no pain.
Even though they were in the air, the danger was far from over for the air crew and their SF passengers.
I remember starting to fly out and still firing all the way out. And I remember we was cutting down. We probably went about 100 yards just cutting treetops out, trying to get out of there. And I remember about halfway back, I seen Mr. Armstrong. He came back around and flew the helicopter back.
Life had become more dangerous for the warriors. As they took on a mission they knew they were not designed to handle. The A-teams, small in size and equipped for rapid movement, did not carry enough firepower to fight running battles with trained and heavily armed NVA and Trail Guard regiments. By 1965, in spite of the best efforts of the SF A-teams and the strike forces, the situation in Vietnam worsened. By the end of January, the Viet Cong were conducting large-scale operations, less than 50 miles from Saigon. To counter that threat, U.S. forces were about to meet the enemy face-to-face in strength for the first time.